customers.
True.
And different types, and you have to learn people's characters and how they work, and to work with them and to get the thing done. So,
or you alienate everyone and piss people off.
Yes.
Business goes under.
Yeah, which doesn't do too good in business. So.
Yeah, I hope that post-business school y'all cannot do that. All right. As soon as this goes off here, I'll get rid of that sound. But for those of you guys that didn't hear, since there's so few that came today, I want to give you guys a bonus. So everyone that's here today will get 100 on the quiz this week, as long as you take it. Okay, so you still have to turn something in, but as long as you do, you'll get 100 on it. All right, so we're going to talk about investments and international operations today.
You haven't posted this, right?
I've not posted the slides yet. Sorry, I probably should have.
Sorry.
I actually, to be honest, forgot that I was doing Tuesday class this week until yesterday. So I was like, okay. Okay, so I guess the first thing to talk about is to remember that when we talk about investments, again, you have to make sure that you're thinking from the correct perspective. So in this case, we're thinking of a company that has excess cash, or perhaps it's part of their business model is to make investments. Obviously, there are like hedge funds and other types of businesses that's all they do is investments. But basically, the same reasons that an individual would invest money in another company or in debt or in anything like that is the same reason a company would. They want to make money on their money. They don't want to just sit there. If you all have bank accounts, even if they have interest-bearing accounts, the rate on an interest-bearing savings account right now is, I think, still right around or below 1%. So money sitting there is money that is getting less and less valuable because cost of things is typically on the rise. So if your money is not doing anything and costs are rising, then you're actually losing money. So with that in mind, companies, if they have excess cash or for whatever reason, will invest in other companies. And that's what we're going to talk about in the accounting for that. This is just a look at some companies you should have or I'm sure have heard of, and what their investments as a percent of total assets are. And you got the yellow for short-term, green for long-term. So obviously with Microsoft, you can see that's 50% of their total assets that they have tied up in investments. So you can see, depending on the company, and obviously Coke, especially if you look at short-term, has next to nothing in there. And those are two, probably top 50 or for sure top 100 companies. And it just depends on what their strategy is, right? It might make sense to you that Microsoft has money tied up in investments because as a technology company, obviously they have to be at the forefront of technology. So they're probably constantly on the lookout for new tech, little tech companies, that type of thing to make investments in. And I'm guessing that's what a majority of the 40% of this short-term investments is from. And then obviously with Coke, Coke hasn't really changed in how many years. So they probably only have this 9% in there just to kind of diversify and eliminate some of the risk of having their money where they have it. But they're obviously not terribly concerned with going out and doing a whole lot of investing. As with everything we've talked about so far, when we talk about short-term versus long-term, typically we want anything that's a short-term investment, we have to convert or have to be planning or thinking about converting to cash within 1 year. That has to be what our underlying motivation is. Or the operating cycle, which we've talked about. But I would say just remember the a 1-year term. Readily convertible to cash. Okay. This sometimes confuses people. We don't talk a lot about cash equivalents in this class, other than just kind of grouping them together with cash. But like accounts receivable is typically thought of as a cash equivalent. But obviously, since these are not, like an accounts receivable is not readily converted and not even necessarily a known amount, when we talk about short-term investments, we're not including that. Long-term, again, typically over the year threshold. And when we talk about investing, we're typically talking about one of two types of investments. Either have debt securities or equity securities. So, they are more commonly known as, like, for debt securities, you typically hear of bonds, and for equity securities, you typically hear of stocks. So, I'm sure most of you know the difference by now between stocks and bonds. If a company invests in debt, that means obviously someone owes them money, and they are acting as a bank would, where they are taking money, giving money in exchange for repayment of that plus interest. And that's what the investment is all about. And some debt securities people invest in, or companies invest in, with the idea that they think the value of that debt security will grow. But typically when people invest in debt, it's because they want the constant known return of whatever the rate is on the bonds. Okay, and then equity securities, obviously when you buy stock, represents an ownership interest in the company, and basically has the rights, privileges associated with that, but also the negatives. So some of those negatives are you don't necessarily get a short-term return at all. Okay, if it's a company that doesn't do dividends, you're not going to get any of your cash back until either they decided to pay out dividends, or until you sell your stock. Okay, so obviously, depending on what your needs are as a company, you may decide that one or both of these types of securities meet your requirements. Okay, so when we talk about the actual accounting of any of these types of securities, we have to look at these 3 steps. Basically, first, we're going to determine if we're dealing with debt or equity. That should be easy. Basically, do we have a bond, some type of interest rate, where we're getting paid back for loaning money, or do we own part of the company? Once we decide that, what is our intent with this security? When we buy it, is our intent to hold on to it forever? So obviously, typically that is only with bonds. Will you buy it and say, I'm keeping this, my intent is to keep this forever no matter what? Because a lot of people do buy bonds for that reason. They'll buy them to hold them, receive the interest payments, and then get paid back the principal at the completion of the term. So typically, the held to maturity securities are only bonds, because that's really the only type of security someone buys and says unconditionally, I'm keeping this until it matures. Okay, but when we talk about the other categories, where we have trading, held to maturity, and available for sale. These are the 3 classes that are determined by step 2 in this process. Okay, so depending on what your intent is about holding on to this security, it will either be classified as a trading, held to maturity, or available for sale security. Okay? And then once you've determined that, then you're going to determine what, with you holding that security, the stock or the bonds or whatever, what is your or your company's percentage ownership or ability to influence the underlying company that issued the stock or the bonds. So if I go out as a company and buy 48, or let's say I go out and buy 60% of the stock of another company, okay? If I'm walking through these steps, well, if I buy stock, it's equity, so that's step one. I intend to hold the security, short or long term. I haven't really said that, but probably if my goal is to control the company, I'll probably hold it long term. So my choices on step 2 there are trading, held to maturity, or available for sale. We said held to maturity typically is only a bond that goes in there, okay? So we can eliminate that once we determine it's an equity. Once we determine it's stock and not bonds, we don't even have to look at held to maturity. We're just looking at trading or available for sale. It's trading if my goal is to grab it, buy it, and flip it within the next month or two. Okay? If my intent is something other than that, then it's available for sale. Okay, that's the longer term holding for stock. Okay? And then that 60% ownership would suggest that I now have a controlling interest. Okay? Significant influence basically means, well, in the accounting world, we've defined it as anything between owning 20 and 50% of a company's stock. Okay? So if you own less than 50, but 20 or more percent of a company's stock, we feel like, no, you don't own the controlling share by yourself, but you still own enough stock that you can exert significant control in voting this company. So in other words, you don't have to convince a whole heck of a lot of people to vote your way to have everything go your way. Okay, so that's obviously pretty significant. So if it's less than 20%, then it doesn't fall into the equity method or the consolidation method. Okay, and we just account for it as normal, and we'll cover how these equity and consolidation methods, how those differ from the normal accounting that you would do for these securities. Okay, but we only have to get into those two categories if we own at least 20% of another company's stock. If it's at least 20, less than 50, then we're into equity method accounting under significant influence. And if we're greater than 50%, we're in consolidation. And consolidation is just like it sounds, but basically that just means instead of treating you like two companies, we treat you like one company. Okay, you guys have seen these all before, so this should just be a review. But this is what it looks like if we issue these bonds according to the terms in these facts. Okay, looks like they are we're buying bonds from Dell at 7%, $30,000 par value. So these bonds are going to pay us $30,000 when they pay off, and we'll be collecting 7% interest each year. Okay, so you'll see this format for journal entries when we talk about investments. For most of them, there'll be some type of investment account that will be our debit. In this case, we've got long-term investments because we're intending to hold this until it matures. This component of the journal entry right here is not necessarily going to be there all the time. It's kind of optional, but it explains, held to maturity is what that stands for, and then Dell, obviously, if you have, 20 different companies you're invested in, you're going to want to track your investment for each of them in a separate account. Okay, so in this same fact pattern, we had accrued interest basically as of December 31st, 2014. That was 4 months after we purchased these bonds. So to calculate the interest that we are owed, we take the par value times the yearly amount, which is 7%, and then multiply that times the fraction of a year that we completed, which was 4/12 or 1/3, and that totals out to $700 in interest revenue. Okay, we haven't received this yet, so we record it instead of debit to cash, we record a debit to interest receivable for the amount, and we record the revenue. So regardless of the fact that we didn't receive cash, when we look at the income statement, it still looks exactly the same as if we had received cash. The reason I mention that, and we'll mention it in a number of other scenarios when we talk about this, is a lot of people look at the income statement of a company to determine how well they're doing financially. Well, and this doesn't happen terribly often, because usually when you're doing well in one category financially, you're doing well in most categories. But it is possible, if you have a lot of situations like this, where the books could look really good, where your income statement could look really good, but you could be really short on cash. Because if you have a bunch of scenarios where you, on the books, earned the revenue, but you haven't been paid yet, you can't go, well, technically you can if you want to sell your accounts receivable, but you're not going to go to your creditors and say, hey, let me pay you with an IOU because this person owes me money. Typically, you wait, they pay you, and then you pay who you owe, right? Well, just because of human nature and the way that we are and the way that we operate, if you've got a cash flow issue like that, a lot of times that will lead to a company failing, even if they're kind of poised to do really well, because they have all this business that they've done where they've collected all these obligations for someone to pay them. But if you don't manage your cash effectively to where you can continue in operations until you collect on that money, then it does you no good, right? So anyway, either way, like I said, on the income statement, it still shows up there. And then on the balance sheet, we record these at amortized cost because they were in that category of held to maturity. Okay. So as of February 28th, we record the actual payment of the interest payment. So when we factor in what the total interest payment is, $30,000 times 7%, we get $1,050. Okay, that's the cash we're receiving. Of that $1,050, $700 of it we recognized in December as revenue and put it in the books as a receivable. Okay, so we're not going to recognize that revenue again, but we are going to lower the receivable amount to show that we received that money. And then the remainder of the cash, the difference between what we received in cash and the revenue we already recognized, needs to be recognized now. That's the interest revenue for this component of the journal entry. And then this should be the easiest question on any debt quiz or test is, when bonds mature, what's the journal entry look like? Well, the amount should be so easy to figure out because it's always the par value of the bonds. Okay? The par value of the bonds tells you what the payoff at the end is going to be. No matter what has happened with discounting, premiums, interest rates in the market, all of that can go up and down wildly and fluctuate. it still stays the par value at the end of the debt obligation. Okay, so when we talk about equity securities, well, hold on. Non-influential investments. I want to use the same language your book uses. We talk about non-influential investments. These are owning stock when you own less than 20% of the company. Okay, so this is the normal way of doing it. Recorded at cost when acquired, including commissions and brokerage fees. So again, this is where the categorization of these securities matters when we go to record what their current value is. Because depending on how we categorize these, that will determine if when a security changes in value, but we didn't do anything with it, we're still holding it, but it changes in value, like let's say I have a stock certificate in my pocket, it's worth $500 right now. By the end of this year, it's going to be worth $10 million. That's a pretty substantial change in value, right? So depending on how I classified that stock certificate, that will determine how I, or whether I do anything about the fact that it appreciated so much in value in this amount of time. Okay? So if it's a trading security, when I go to do my financial statements at the end of the year, I will have to actually recognize a gain for the difference between what it was at the beginning of the year valued at and what it is now. So if it was valued at $500 and now it's $10 million, I have to recognize all of that in a gain, even if it's still in my pocket. I've not washed my pants all year. I've been wearing the same pants. It's still in that pocket. I've done nothing with it. And it changed in value that much. I don't know how many 100% that is, but a lot. We will either record that as a gain, or we will say nothing's happened because there was no economic event. I didn't sell the stock. The company didn't buy it back. There was no debt retired. Nothing like that happened. Okay. So for both the trading and available for sale categories, if the value changes, we're going to record that somewhere. Where we record it is different for each of those, but for each of those, we will record a change in value as it happens, or basically on the financial statements. When I go to do financial statements, if a change has happened since the last financial statements or since I bought the security, I will have to mark down what that change is if it's in trading or available for sale. Okay? If it's held to maturity, I basically say, well, once I made the decision to buy this security, this debt that I'm going to hold forever, I don't care what the market does. It's meaningless to me because that's basically a sunk cost. I'm not going to do anything with that money. There's nothing, like I can't go back in time and change my decision. And so at this point, the market is irrelevant to me. Okay? So for those scenarios, we don't have to do anything with it. I don't care that it appreciated or depreciated in value if my plan is to hold it forever. So to be categorized as a trading security, it has to meet these. It has to be actively managed and traded for profit. Obviously, debt or equity security, frequent purchases and sales expected. Not a whole lot of teeth or a lot of real great rules for determining what is a trading security, but the way I think about it is basically if you're buying stocks for the purpose of basically, if you can think about it like flipping a house, if you're buying stocks because you think they're going to go up or down in value, if you're playing options or whatever you're doing, if that's your purpose, then you're probably dealing with trading securities, because people that are looking at those fluctuations in price and looking to make money on those short-term fluctuations are typically dealing with trading securities. If you're buying stocks to buy and hold or to control a company, then that's probably more like an available for sale category. Doesn't mean you have to be looking to take over a company or have some other plan like that to consider it available for sale. You could just say, you could just have it in your company policies that you don't want to deal with short-term markets, so any investments you make, you're going to automatically hold for a year no matter what. Or, it doesn't even have to be that formal. You can just say, this is how we do things here. We don't buy and sell securities. We buy and hold them for at least, however long we feel like, but longer than a few months. So basically, if you're buying and selling for, I don't want to narrow it down to exactly on a year, but if it's less than a year, chances are that it's probably a trading security. And that should make sense, obviously. If you're planning to flip it, within the next week, and the value changes a bunch in 2 days, it makes sense that you should probably be keeping track of that, because those changes in value that are real short term but coincide with your short term plans with the stock, those will affect you greatly, right? You have a lot of interest rate risk or investment risk. So if you get grouped into the trading securities category, these are reported at fair value, and the unrealized gain or loss is reported in the income statement. So that's where this differs from available for sale. We still capture the changes in value for available for sale. They just don't show up on the income statement, which means they don't affect the all-important metric of net income. So this is what a fair value adjustment looks like. Okay, in this case, the value went up $1,500. So we record a debit to fair value adjustment trading for that amount, and a credit to unrealized gain. And income there is just to show you, you might also see that abbreviated I/S, but that's just to show you that this in fact is showing up on the income statement. And then this is how it would show up on the balance sheet. Okay, so you have the cost of the investment in the investment account, that never changes, so you always know what you paid for it, but then the changes in value are captured in this adjustment account. So if it goes up, this would continue to go up. If it goes down, this could be negative as well. Okay.
And when we involved in purchase other things in the past, you included like sales tax, the mere capital gains tax when you made money off of trading securities.
Yes, there is, but we're not gonna.
But would it be recorded at the same time? I know we.
No. Well, I mean, you're just saying, would you record tax at the same time that you recorded what?
This, or would you
the
wait
adjustment?
You would do it when you actually sell
Yeah.
it, right?
You don't record tax until a sale actually takes place.
So this is kind of keeping track. I mean, what if you lose money? Do you come back and make an adjustment saying that you've lost money?
Yes, you do. And basically, so the fair value adjustment account will go up and down, above zero, below zero, and that will always net out to the total fair value of what these investments are.
So the fair value trade, if it was in the negative, would be a credit, and then the unrealized gains would be...
It would be an unrealized loss. But it would be on the other side.
Yeah, on that side. Okay.
Yep. So the fair value adjustment account, these contra accounts like that and this is one of the few that does it like this, but these are one of the few accounts that can have a credit or debit balance. And that's just because obviously if it's raising or lowering the account, it has to be able to do both. Okay. Well, let me back up real quick here. Trading securities that had a cost for $1,000 are now being sold for $1,200 cash. Again, cost, difference between what it cost us and what we received for it is either going to be a gain or a loss. If we paid more than what we are getting for it, obviously it's going to be a loss, and vice versa, right? Held to maturity. You guys should all be fairly familiar with that. That's just how we've done bonds, basically. Yeah, nothing groundbreaking in that slide. All right, available for sale. So this looks very much like the trading securities, except down here, number 5, unrealized gains or loss reported in the equity section of the balance sheet as part of comprehensive income. What that means is a savvy investor that's looking at this company and evaluating how it's doing or whatever, it's not going to matter to them whether something's classified available for sale or trading security. They will be able to look at the financial statements and see, okay, if I see some unrealized gains or losses in the equity section of the balance sheet, that just means that they were investments categorized as available for sale. Okay? So obviously, this adds a little bit of a wrinkle to the complexity of the financial statements, but it still functions like most things we've seen. Short term means within 1 year, so any of these available for sale securities that we have in our portfolio that are likely to be sold, or the intent is to sell them within the year, they would be considered short-term investments, and then long-term if longer than that. Okay, so on December 20th, Music City sells 500 shares of Intex in the open market for $45,000. Okay, calculate the original cost of shares. I don't know where that info came from. We'll just assume that's right. So originally, $86 per share. All right, so basically, we'll just say that we're given the amount that it cost us at $43,000, and then we're told that we sell in the open market for $45,000. So the difference between 43 and 45 is $2,000. We received more than what we paid, so it's a gain. Okay, gain on sale of long-term investments. And again, this is where your sales tax would come into it. And the fact, and I'm not going to overly complicate it, but just so you know, this is one of the scenarios, or one of the reasons why you keep separate books for tax and just financial accounting purposes. Because there are some things where either the definition is not quite the same, or there are just slight differences from the way that you're required to do it by the tax code. And if you're a Fortune 500 company or a publicly traded company, the SEC requires you to do certain things slightly differently.
If different stocks and shares that you bought from a thing, so say Microsoft, 50% is
Uh-huh.
stuff, right? So a savvy investor would look at their sheets, their financial documents, and be able to withdraw the stuff that they're making interest and money off of that, and see whether the core business is making money. Correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's what you want to do, not just look at, oh, the stock is going up.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so many layers to investing, right? I mean, people look at the craziest stuff, and it's an information game where, basically you can get as much information as you want, and it's just a matter of, how much does that help you and how much does it not. But yeah, it goes way beyond is the stock price going up or going down, and a savvy investor has, even if they're not accounting people, they have enough knowledge of what this means that they're able to extract, and I think that's where you're getting
at.
If
the company looks good at the end of the year because they've made profit, but all their profit is just off of the revenues they made off of their shares, and they've made a loss in their actual business, then that may be a key sign that the company's not doing
right. And then, yes, to answer your question, a savvy investor would see that and would know. And if you just look at the example slide that we saw where you have Microsoft, 50% of their assets are in investments. Well, okay, so I'm not going to be as worried if 50% of their assets are tied to investments and their investments are returning, let's say, 20%. Okay, that's a pretty good return, right? But their core business outside of that is losing money each year. But overall, they're still making money. That wouldn't worry me as much because I'm thinking, well, half of their assets are being devoted to investments, and they're doing well with that, so that kind of is part of their core business. But you look down at Coke, and if Coke's underlying core business was doing really poorly or just marginally well, but they have those really small investments, but one of those just takes off and does super well for some reason. Yeah, I mean, that would concern me a whole lot more than Microsoft's core business being less than their investments, just because of the way, the breakdown of, how much, that breakdown of what they're using their assets for tells you a lot about what their goals are and what the business is doing. And then you can use that to draw conclusions and stuff. Okay. Let's see. We already talked about that. Music City had no prior investments. In the current period, it acquired 2 available for sale securities. Following information is provided. Okay, so we have 2 securities. One of them lost or went down in value after we bought it. One of them went up in value after we bought it. Okay, they're both available for sale. At the end of the year, we go to do financial statements. We have to record the fact that these changes in value occurred. Since these are both available for sale and long-term, we're only doing one entry to capture the effect of both of these. Okay, so we're not doing one entry for the $2,500 gain and one for the $950 loss. We're netting those together and calling it a $1,550 gain and unrealized. And basically what happens is, well, I'll just cross that bridge when we come to it. Should be soon here. Okay, so this is just a look at their balance sheet with that component added in, and obviously net those two together to give you what their current fair value of the long-term investments in this available for sale category is. Let's see, there's a slide that I want to pull up here. Okay, yeah, I think this is it. Okay, see. Extend our example. Assume that at December 31st, 2015, the portfolio of long-term available for sale security has an $81,000 cost and an $82,000 fair value. Actually, this slide is just really confusing. Basically, what this slide is trying to say is if you look at the T-charts of these two accounts and you've done everything right, then these two account balances should balance. That wasn't quite what I was getting at, but what I was thinking this slide was saying, and what I guess I'm going to use it for, is since we're kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Since we're kind of grouping all of these available for sale long-term securities into one group as far as the fair value adjustment is concerned, at the end of the year when I go to change what the fair value is, all I have to look at is the overall fair value of all of these investments and what the overall cost was to me for all of those investments. And whatever the difference is, I have to make sure that that is what the balance is in my fair value adjustment account. Okay? So the fair value adjustment account needs to equal the difference between what I paid for these securities and what they're worth now. Now, just because they went up a lot last year and so I had an adjustment, and then this year, let's say they went down a lot and I'm going to have to adjust. Not only am I going to have to adjust back down to like the baseline, I'm going to have to go below that for this year. So what I guess I'm trying to get at is within this fair value adjustment account, you're capturing the effects of all time of these securities. Obviously, if you sell any one of them, then their individual effects go out of that account. But for all other securities that you own, you're looking at a lifetime of that security in your hands, and the value adjustment should reflect that. So the overall total value adjustment should equal the difference between the cost you paid and the value today. And if it doesn't, that's when you have to do a journal entry to adjust either the debit or credit side of this T-chart to get you to where you need to be. That will give you one side of the journal entry, and depending on which side that is, that will either lead to a gain or a loss. Okay? Actually, that's about as far as I want to hit in this chapter. So we'll stop there. There's actually, I think, one more learning objective after this, but it's not tested in the quiz this week. So I'll kill it there today. Anybody have any questions on what we hit so far?
Can you just sign in?
Yes. Before you leave, sign in, please. Otherwise, next Tuesday, midterm, I will send several emails reminding you. Start of midterm is next Tuesday. Both days, Tuesday and Thursday, we'll take the midterm. You will get, we have no class on Thursday in person, but look for some videos of me posting. I'll post today's class. I'll post the review for the midterm. And then if anyone has questions that they want me to go over, I can post a video of that too. Okay? All right. See you all.
Have a good weekend.
You too.
I doubt it.
Involves work all weekend, I guess, so could be better. Well, I hear the weather's supposed to suck this weekend, so.
Yeah, that's always a good thing, except for I'll be
76?
outside part of the weekend.
That's not the weekend. Someone said snow.
Snow on Friday.
Friday, yeah.
Yeah.
Unacceptable. Yeah. from Florida. You're a Gators fan?
Are you going to Florida?
What's that?
Are you going to Florida?
Am I going to Florida? What do you mean? Just vacating?
Well, yeah, no, I was like,
Yeah, the sweatshirt on.
we're not having class Thursday, so I thought.
Oh, no. My wife has a photography business.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Cool. I was like, I thought you may have been going to Florida. I was like, oh man, that must be really tough. Yeah.
No, my kids don't have spring break.
Oh, really?
They have 3 days off for spring break. I was
That
like,
sucks.
Free.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, man.
These are the most comfortable shoes I've ever put on, man.
It's beside you.
Even
so
for Vans, they got
it
this
doesn't give that
crazy
second
sole
exam
that's like
until
memory
after.
foam or something.
I gotta
go
So we don't have a midterm in other class. We have
So yeah.
three exams and then a final. The final is a court thing too. So
Yeah, more pain. Getting destroyed by them.
yeah, I know.